We're just meeting with Dave Knott. We talked to him several days ago. He's an alumnus, soon to be alumnus of Log College and Seminary. He's going to continue his work doing that. We're waiting for Dave to arrive. Last time he got some pushback from some Armenian Baptists who thought he was bragging about his academic work. And let's see, and also on Arminianism. And we talked with Reverend Dr. Andy Underhill today on the same subject. We're just waiting for Dave to show up. So the subject of the day will probably be Arminianism and educated clergy. Interestingly, Andy notably mentioned that Arminianism was in fact, where did we go here? We sort of lost there we go. Is really a Trinitarian heresy that attacks, camouflage, the work of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And that's a good way to look at it. Every heresy goes back to the Trinity, be it Pelagianism, semi-Pelagianism. We propose to keep asking these questions. It's not just soteriology, but it is in the vast sweep that includes the doctrine of God, the doctrine of man. Here's Dave now. The soteriology, ecclesiology, and eschatology. Hi, Dave, you're connecting. You should hear me momentarily. So let me know when you can hear me. You should be good now, I think. I can see you, and I hope you can hear me. Let me know when you can hear me. It is recording, so I'll just wait until Dave can hear. They've got some bad snow up his way. And we're talking about, just speak when you can hear me, Dave. It should seem to be having a connection issue. So back to Arminianism. It's not a soteriological issue only, and that's a warrantable thing to notice that came out of today's discussion with Reverend Dr. Andy Underhill. Let me know when you can hear me, Dave. I can see you. Let me just make sure that everything looks good on my end. I'm not sure why we can't hear you. Dave is doing some so we'll just wait for him to come back again. Still waiting for audio for some reason. This is when you can hear me, let me know.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Finally. I already gave some background to our last discussion on it got off into Arminianism, and you got some blowback on that from our last discussion, and some guys taking pot shots at your education. So Andy and I kind of went over that today. So
I saw that.
Yeah, Arminianism is, I guess, the subject, and the educated clergy. I don't get out much, so I don't have acquaintances to talk about Arminianism, but it's vital. So let's, we can handle it however we want to, biblically, in terms of our experiences. What happened from the blowback?
Well, I got 3 messages on Facebook, and all 3 of them were, I don't know what the right word would be. One wasn't as less damaging or as hateful. I got one that said, "Oh, now you got an education. Now you think you know something, right?" And I sensed at least a tone of jealousy in that, and because all 3 of these people, let me say this: all 3 of those messages that I got were friends of mine on Facebook.
Okay.
All 3 of them were Baptists, and all 3 of them were free will, Arminian doctrine. And, I stayed friends with them on Facebook because I knew 2 of them for a long time, since I was a teenager.
When you say Free Will Baptist, do you mean the denomination Free Will Baptist?
No. Those people believe you can lose your salvation.
Okay.
I'm talking about your most 9 out of 10 Baptist churches today in America. They're premillennial. They don't believe in the Old Testament church. They're dispensationalists. But the 3 of them I got messages from. I started to write a letter to the guy, and he messaged me in the middle of it, and I said, "Well, I was going to write a letter to you. It's too much stuff to say on Messenger." And he said, "Oh, there's no reason to write me a letter. Just, tell me the bits of it here." And one of the things he said, which I called him out on, is he said Jesus never went to seminary, and he was the best preacher ever. And I told him, I said, "Well, Jesus is God, and God wrote the Bible, so he doesn't need theology. He already knows it." Some of his statements were mixed with anger, jealousy, and just bad doctrine.
So that was his exit ramp. His
What's that?
exit ramp. Exit ramp.
Oh yeah.
He wanted you to go off that with him.
No, I wasn't. I was going to stay and defend it. And the heart of the matter is with these Arminianists, I think the best way to debate them is on the doctrine of limited atonement, because since they believe Jesus died for everybody, Christ, all you got to do is say, "Jesus, come into my heart," and bam, you're saved or you're regenerated. And if that's true, then there's no place like this. Hell doesn't exist. There's no punishment. Everybody's saved. Everybody's regenerated. And that is just 180 degrees opposite of what's in the Bible. Got a piece of crap on my face. But yeah, they were all, they took offense at it.
Were these clergymen, or were they just run-of-the-mill pew member.
Two of them were ordained clergymen.
And where did they go to school?
No, none of them went to any school of any type. They just felt called. You know, God doesn't call somebody without giving instruction. I mean, Paul disappeared for 4 years and he came back. And Paul was a very smart man, probably the most intelligent of all the apostles. He was a Sanhedrin. He knew the Old Testament Hebrew Bible. He knew Greek. He knew how to speak Hebrew, Greek. Probably I don't know about Latin or not, but Paul was definitely an educated man, and he had to go disappear for 4 years and be taught. 3 or 4 years, I forget what it was. But none of these attended any seminary, any Bible college. I think one may have taken some certificate course, but those ain't nothing. Those are good for someone that wants to learn a little bit more, but it wouldn't qualify you to pastor a church in any sense of the word.
I think Andy's practical slap down. You want your medical doctor to be educated in medicine, and you want your car mechanic to know car mechanics. You don't want to go get eye surgery from somebody who's not an eye surgeon,
Right. Well, when I first signed up for the North American Reformed Seminary, which is what Log College was called then, I had a local Presbyterian pastor message me and said, "You do not need that much schooling to preach." He gave me some place to take a course, and I think it was like 40 credits. And he says, "You take this and you can preach." And I said to him, if you were going to have surgery, what surgeon would you choose? The one that had 6 years of training or the one that had 3 years of training? And, he just didn't answer.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard from the guy since.
Well, that's an outlier. Generally, the PCA and OPC require at least 90 hours for the MDiv, and I understand Westminster Seminary has put it up to 4 years with 106 hours, maybe 116, which is a change. That kind of takes 4 years now instead of 3. And that's true of the satellite schools of Reformed Theological Seminary. So, and that's, as my dad said, that's a beginner's degree, the Master of Divinity.
Yeah, there's doctorates afterwards.
Exactly. I mean, you're just getting the basics. And Roman Catholics do the same. They expect 4 years of philosophy and a bachelor's, and then 3 years of divinity. And the same for the mainline, although they've been feeding them poison, subjectivity as a hermeneutical principle. Log College, of course, is old Princetonian. And so you get the classics there, which is very, very good. So this outlier PCA guy, he's an oddball.
Well, he is part of the PCA Synod in West Virginia.
Okay. So it's on the presbytery.
Yeah, and what he does is there's some clause they have that if somebody wants to be a missionary, they will waive the education, the MDIV. They will waive that so that he can become ordained and go to the mission field, thinking somehow people living over in some other country don't deserve a knowledgeable pastor. But they've taken that and they've inserted into America. And the PCA, I don't know if it's all of them, but this PCA is ordaining someone that simply just wants to preach.
Well, what I would like to do is to track down the moderator of that presbytery and get him on, interview him and see what's what. It's certainly an odd situation, and I've been around PCA since I remember when they started. And that would be a very, very odd in terms of the big picture.
I think what they are doing is, do you remember the Snod back in, I don't know when it happened, mid-turn of the century, between 1800, 1900, where the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians had an issue of how long ministers should spend in seminary. And at one time they were in agreement, 4 years. But the Congregationalists stopped requiring 4 years because at that time everybody was pushing to the west, for missionaries, churches, and the Baptists just thought, we'll give this guy a 6-month running course and either he sinks or fails.
The old joke was when the Methodist circuit rider would ride into a backwoods town, they'd ordain the circuit rider, the Methodists would, and the Baptists would ordain the horse.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
But when we're talking about the PCA now, they're new in terms of church history. They started in 1973, so they're distinct from the 19th century. They're about 50 years old, actually, and it was a surprise. I never quite understood why they didn't just join with the OPC, but one was super confessional and the PCA was for the officers, but not necessarily for the parishioners.
Well, I remember the PCA recently, and when I say recently, I'm meaning between a year and 2 years ago, they were going to decide on what constitutes marriage, a man and a woman. That was the hot topic back then. And everybody was so relieved that they ruled in favor of marriage as being between one man and one woman. And that, of course, it sent a sigh of relief through everybody. But the very issues that the PCA left the Presbyterian Church of America, that liberal Presbyterian group, the same reasons why they left them reasons that they left are biting them in the buttocks right now, present day. The issues didn't go away. They put it off for a little while, and it come back to haunt them. It's just amazing. And there's still Calvinists, but the church I'm talking about, they use, and I mentioned this last time we spoke, they use the now they still claim they use the Westminster Confession, but they use one called New City Catechism.
Oh, yeah.
And that's written by Tim Keller. And Tim Keller was a Darwinist. And of course, being a Darwinist, you can't believe in creation. And in that catechism, it just doesn't mention creationism at all.
I've not read it. I probably should go and read the thing.
I read about half of it. And, you know, what's in it is good, but that's not the question. The question is what's not in it, and that's the issue I have with it.
How about predestination? Is that in it?
I forget now exactly how it read because I read it about 3 or 4 years ago. But I'm sure now that you're speaking of predestination, I was a Baptist. First, I was brought up in a liberal congregational church. And when I got 20, I went to a Baptist church, and I heard more of the Bible there than I heard in the congregational church. So I joined the Baptist church. And I was in that camp, probably 30 years.
Wow.
And every time I read my Bible, the word elect, foreknowledge, the story with Jacob and Esau. Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated. They were still babies. They were fetuses. They can't, you know. Jacob certainly didn't do any good works as a fetus to earn God's favor. But they will not constantly, but I'll say about once or twice a year, you'll hear a sermon about Calvinism being straight out of the pits of hell. And these guys, they do not preach an exegetical sermon. They have the text that they'll, you know, take out of the context, and they'll preach that. And at the end of the service, they give an altar call and say, you know, anybody that, you know, God is working on your heart, come forward here, and we'll show you how to be saved. Well, they run them through what they call the Romans Road. Pat them on the shoulder, says, well, now you remember God. And most cases, there's never any follow-up. Truth of the matter is, once you become a Christian, you got more battles than you ever had. And if you're naming the name of Christ and you don't have any battles, then you're just a professor.
Absent from one's post in time of war.
That would be a good name for it, for sure.
How did you come around to accept the biblical view of God on predestination? I want to make sure that we recognize the wisdom of Andy this morning, that this is a Trinitarian issue, not soteriology, anthropology, Christology, ecclesiology, it's the whole ball of wax in terms of the Trinitarian God. When did you begin shifting and how?
Well, I kept, you know, in our Bible devotions every morning, I kept stumbling across various verses and I had, you know, election in the back of my mind. I said, man, this has to be true. I mean, why is it so often mentioned in the Bible? And it almost appeared on every single page. And I had an old friend who was a Baptist pastor back then, who I haven't spoken to for probably 30 years. I was wondering if he had a Facebook account, and I started looking and looking and looking, and I finally found the guy. And we ended up talking on the phone, and he, you know, I already believed it, but I just didn't know the full meaning of it, I guess I could say. And he really helped answer a lot of my questions, and he was very useful in that. He had left the Baptist denomination. He started a Presbyterian church, and after it was on its feet and going on good, he stopped and let someone else pastor it, and he went back for their 30th year anniversary, and he preached then. The guy's a solid Calvinist, but he has issues that I would disagree with. He believes in the gap theory. He kept urging me to read Meredith Kline. And, you know, if you look at Kline's credentials, they're very impressive. I mean, he's got a lot of credentials. But if he starts doubting and speculating and inserting his own ideas into the book of Genesis, I can't imagine what goes in there by the time he gets to Revelation. And the guy, I just, you know, he's very wordy, he's very well educated, and I think because people, when I read him, I had to have a dictionary. I think he appeals to people because he's so educated.
He was an Old Testament man, got his PhD at Dropsy, which I understand now has shut down. But Dropsy was on Broad Street in Philadelphia. It was a Hebrew school, and a lot of Westminster guys went down and took their PhD in Old Testament at Dropsy. So he's good on Hebrew. He was good on the suzerainty covenant treaties of the second millennium being reflected in the Pentateuch. I had a course with him on the Old Testament prophets, and it was okay, but I'm a Philip Hughes, Edgecombe Hughes man, and it was what it was. So I wouldn't describe myself as Kleinian. I knew he was gap theory, though. That was evident.
Yeah, you know, and a lot of, well, I know two Orthodox Presbyterian who believe in the gap theory, and I'm having trouble trying to figure how that they believe the gap theory with the Westminster Confessions.
Yeah.
It clearly says, you know, a 6-day creation, 24-hour, 7 literal days. And I don't understand that. I would expect that from some other type of Presbyterian church, but I would never expect that from an Orthodox Presbyterian church.
Yeah, I kind of lost contact with them when I went off in the Navy. I knew an OPC chaplain, but I haven't followed them closely.
Well, I know some, and they're very, very strong on what they believe, and they believe in the 6-day, you know, literal 6-day creation.
I'm gonna be trying to contact some of these guys in the future, God willing. PCA and OPC and Anglican. That's a little out of the wheelhouse of the Anglicans because that would require them to do some serious academic reading, which I not very convinced about. But as far as OPCs and PCAers, I can certainly try to keep that in mind and ask that question, because there is a conflict between gap theory and the Westminster Standards. I note that Augustine was kind of gappish, but day means day, although some references in the Old Testament do allow for an expanded view of, you know, he lived back in the day. which can mean a wider sense, but so I'm gonna keep that in mind. Because again, I don't get out much. This is our time of fellowship and discussion.
Well, yeah, I don't get out a whole lot either, unless it's to go to the grocery store and pick up some medicine.
Yep.
Other than that, I don't go out. I stay here and I continuing my studies.
I noticed you did say you're thinking of doing the BTH.
That was another seminary, and I figured, well, I'll just wait until I get my degree, and I'll enroll in Log College.
Yeah.
And get the degree I need there. And that way I will be able to take the doctorate courses that the Log College offers.
I looked at the BTH here after we talked and went back over it, and it's good stuff. Some of it would be review for you, but it's just good stuff.
It's good to review. I was reading Lorraine Bachner, whatever. Yeah, and his book is great. I mean, I was glued to it.
Clear writer.
Oh yeah, nobody beats the Presbyterian. I mean the Puritans. They can make a sentence a paragraph long,
Yeah.
but they were the most educated theologians that ever graced this country.
Well, Lorraine Bettner died. He's a 20th century man. Old Princeton from, I think he had Machen and that crowd. He used to send me, we got about 10 minutes. He used to send me boxes of books of his free of charge, the Reformed doctrine of predestination, and I'd hand them out like candy. I don't know how I got in touch with him. It was by letter. Next thing you know, there's a box arriving. And then when I ran out, I'd write him again and another box would arrive. He was a professor somewhere down in the Midwest. And then
yeah, I know he was that. I don't know where. But I particularly, I mean, I like Bachner and I like some of the others of the 19th, of early Princeton.
Yeah.
Edwards, I don't really care for too much because he puts so much of his philosophy into his papers. It takes time to get to the chase, and I don't really have that much patience.
Yeah.
I did read his book, The History of Our Redemption. And that book was beautiful. It was like one giant book of poetry.
Are you talking about Jonathan Edwards?
Yeah.
Of Princeton.
Right. The one that was credited with the Great Revival, the one out of Hampton, I think.
Right.
North Adams, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I took a seminar on Jonathan Edwards with Dr. Gelzo, who's a Edwardsian scholar, did his PhD on it. And I read all kinds of Edwards. And once I was done with that seminar, I never picked up another book by him.
Yeah. I read that one book. It was great. And I thought of getting his works of 2 volumes. And I started reading some of it. I never got it, but I started reading. I found it somewhere and I was reading it online. I'm like, man, I don't want to read this guy. He's just, he's knowledgeable, but man, I rather read a straight shooter. I don't want to have to stop every paragraph and look up 2 words to see what they mean.
His 1751 on the freedom of the will. I read that a number of times and it was tricky stuff. and about the moral ability of the will, and this, that, and the other. At the end of it, Dr. Gelzo's thesis was he opened the door to Arminianism.
Yeah, I read that somewhere.
And that was kind of, and I looked at it from that angle, and what he did, and some of the Edward Zian followers, Hopkins and his crowd, I read their sermons, and you could see the door had been opened, and a weakening on the doctrine of total depravity. So I said,
Yeah,
bye-bye. He's buried up in Princeton graveyard
right,
off
right, yeah.
Williams.
And I went in, I don't know if it's North Andover, I forget whatever town, and they had a little small stone plaque, birthplace of Jonathan Edwards. That's all there was. But most of those, the Arminians, which, I mean, they were always against total depravity. I know one of these Baptists that I was speaking to is partly Pelagism.
He's what?
One is, he says that we're not born dead in trespasses and sins. We learn that from our parents, and so we eventually sin and get on God's bad side. I mean, what kind of crap is that? And this is the guy that pastors the church. The same guy told me, I asked him a question one time, just trying to push him of his buttons. And he said, look, my people are simple people. They don't know any doctrine. They don't know anything. They're very simple. I said, well, how come they don't know anything? You've been preaching there for 30 years, right? And the guy hasn't messaged me since.
Be ignorant like me is more like it.
Well, we're all ignorant. I had to conquer a lot of personal obstacles to finish that course I took at law college. But if you just push a little bit every day, you'll eventually get there.
Yeah.
We have SD de Graaf's, his 4-volume works. And we're on volume 2 now. My wife and I, we read it every morning. And to get to finish his 4th volume, it's probably going to take 2 years.
That's fine.
You know, I've got nothing but time.
Yeah, I've read those 4 volumes. He's out of the Skildarian camp of Klaus Skilder, which on the covenant I have questions. I'm more in the Protestant Reformed view. I am planning to interview, God willing, Reverend Wes Bradenhoff or Bradenhorf. He's living in Australia now, and it's called Canadian Reformed, and I want to interview him. So anyways, that's some stuff in the weeds. Important stuff that I think is Arminianizing with de Graaf. I know Andy likes him, but I'm just watchful.
Well, I'm kind of watchful with anybody I read, but his treasures are gold reading him. I haven't found anything that I disagree with him with. He wrote them for his Sunday school teachers.
I know. Oh, they've got the way the Reformed catechetize their children. They were pretty well trained in the basics. And
well, I think that saved a lot of churches because mainline Protestantism is pretty much all Arian, Arminian.
And worse.
Yeah, you got these evangelical, these community churches, these non-denom churches, and it's like a bag of mixed nuts. You don't know what you're gonna get.
Yeah.
The catechism, the writing of them, was the best thing the churches have ever done.
Yep.
Because if a church, let's say it was formed 200 years ago, and they have a catechism,
You know
well,
what they believed.
right. Well, also, if some preacher comes in and starts preaching something that ain't right, they're gonna know.
Yeah. Listen, we gotta bring this to an end, brother.
All right, Donald. It was nice talking to you. And
Yeah. We'll be back at it again.
yeah. All right, then. I'll talk to you later, brother.
Godspeed.
Godspeed. Bye bye.